Hi everybody, Mary here. Hope you're having a fantastic week. I got a great question asked of me a few days ago and I wanted to share with you. And the question has to do with resume types, and specifically, is a chronological resume better than a functional resume or vice versa? And also, is there ever an occasion where one would be better suited than the other? And for those of you who might not know the difference between a chronological or functional resume, I'll tell you now. So basically, chronological resumes are pretty popular in terms of what everybody uses in the job market. So for the most part, resume is organized primarily by the work experience and when it happened. And it typically starts with the most current work experience and then backs it up on your resume. So for example, if you're in a job right now, that would be the first employment that you list. And then the one that you had, before your current job is the next one, and so on down the line. Okay. Education and maybe awards that you've won, it varies where that might be on a chronological resume. Honestly, what's important here is that your work experience is driven by dates. Now, functional resumes are different. So they don't necessarily subscribe to the date-driven focus. They're really documents that showcase the breadth of experience or expertise and knowledge that you might have in functional areas. So for example, say a person has worked, say 20 years in the workforce, and they first started out their career working as a staff accountant for say like 10 years. And then they pivoted later on to manage teams and really stepped away from the accounting aspect and really gathered and gained a lot of people management skills and managing teams and interpersonal dynamics and stuff like that. They also might have, really been involved with fundraising efforts, say if they worked at a nonprofit organization, working with donors and outreach to the community and things like that. So for a person who might have this kind of background, they have diverse skills that seem to have a lot of depth to them in terms of it being their expertise. People arrange functional resumes based primarily off of the expertise, so they showcase that. They don't have to tie specific dates of where they acquired the knowledge on there, at least generally they don't. So, I see functional resumes to be pretty common for people who have worked a very long time in the workforce and they've acquired that really rich background. I've also seen the resume, however, used for people who might not necessarily have a focus or know what they're doing. They just know that they've had experience in certain areas that they want to share. In terms of which I think of the two is preferred, for me, I prefer seeing the chronological resume, and this is why. The marketplace, the job market, people who are involved in reviewing for positions, they're most familiar with the chronological format, to be quite honest. And a lot of job seekers are pretty, familiar with that format to structure everything in that kind of templated fashion. However, I prefer this chronological resume, not just because everyone's doing it, but because it actually sets out a few very important things. It establishes timeline of what you're doing professionally, where certain accomplishments were done, plotted out like in a line or a path in a storyline of your professional accomplishments. In a functional resume, it's really hard to determine what that is. But I do want to warn people that if they choose to do that, it's really tough to see the timeline of your professional life, like when certain things were accomplished, if you're using that. I know that I often have to go back and ask, okay, so where did you do that? And, for how long were you working on such and such a project? Or when did you acquire that expertise? And you'll find that in some cases, people might not have that much experience. It was 6 months here, or it was, 2 years, but it was also 2 years, 15 years ago. And that kind of thing matters. Not only just how many years of experience, but how current is your knowledge. These are all things that are pretty accessible in a chronological resume rather than a functional one. You know, there are times though when I recommend a functional resume, but typically it's not to get you in the door. Generally, functional resumes to me should be used as supportive documentation. You know, after you secure a job interview using a chronological resume, and after you meet, you know, interviewers, and then as a follow-up step, you know, to provide documentation that supports you or samples of your work, then you can throw in a functional resume, in my opinion. So it just adds a layer of depth, but not necessarily the kind of introduction that you want to have right at the start, because you know, people are often trained and systems are often programmed to look for chronological resume formats, not just for keywords and phrasings, but also the dates and the recent accomplishment of your skills and experience. So I would love to hear what you guys think about that. If you agree or disagree, either way, leave me a comment below. Would love to hear from you. And until next week in our next video blog post, hope you have a great rest of your week and we'll talk soon. Thanks, guys.